ECW always gets talked about as how crazy it was, behind the scenes at the hotels, at the shows. Is there any kind of story that you think of that kind of sums up what
Who
ECW,
says it was crazy?
like the general populace, kind of
Uh,
talk about it as if it was a crazy time? The Blue Meanie will talk about you don't want to have been at the hotels and stuff that went on. Is there a story about ECW that you think kind of encapsulates what it was like in the 90s being there? Because I think people probably don't realize what it was like because it's so.
well, society was different in the 90s, and different in the 80s and different in the 60s and different worldly things, So I think in the 90s, at the building, someone would go over the guardrail or whatever, or someone, someone get hit with something, a fan, they wouldn't run and get a lawyer. They would just say, hey, the building people would check. He's like, they're freaking knot on their head and gash because something flew out of the ring, and or people fought in the crowd and got hit with a chair or a back elbow, and they're like, hey, can they sign this table for me, chunk of table, and they're Jews more than wrestlers, and and then people would come back in the locker room, like people that would work security or whatever, Atlas, and say, hey, can you sign this for a fan that got hit with a chair? Yeah, sure, no problem. Sign. Go give it to them. They'd be like, oh, this is the greatest day of my life. Fans are leaving there all messed up, on accident, and but now it's like you sneeze on a person and they're running and grabbing a lawyer, so you got to be very careful, so society was different, the attitude of society was different, um but like I would travel with Sabu, and we would go to the town, work, go to the next town. If we stopped at a restaurant, a lot of the boys were there, and we'd hang out with the boys or whatever, and then but it was always business. So I never really got into or were in situations where crazy hotel parties and all that, and so yeah, there was a lot of craziness going on, but I was never really involved too much in it. So
And there's famously you win the ECW World Title like Guilty as Charged right towards the end,
mhm.
like 2 weeks before the end of ECW. When you win that belt that night, do you guys kind of know it's the end? Do you think it's the end?
No,
Is anybody saying anything at this point?
I didn't believe it was the end because houses were up and stuff like that. We're really, even though the TV ended with Spike, like a few months prior to that, the houses were still up, So and Pee Wee said it the best. Once we got TV, everybody's thinking like, right away it's gonna. He goes, it'll take about a year before we see the results, of the TV. And sure as he was right, because really, 10, 11 months, the houses really started, going up. And it was unfortunate that we only had that year, but I think we got an extra 6 weeks because that's when TNN went with Raw, and then they changed to Spike. So I think we were kind of like that. But I think we were supposed to have a 3-year deal, but they, X'd out on that. So.
I mean, you win the title at Guilty as Charged January 2001, and then you do a couple of title defenses. There's a few more shows. Do you remember how you found out the ECW was
There
over?
just weren't any. I was talking to Paul, and he was like, I'm just taking a little break, and then we're going to come back. And anyways, after a few weeks, and I'm still not seeing any dates announced or anything, I'm kind of thinking, and then WWE contacted me and said, see, we told you it was done, but I, I was called to call them right before, like a week before, like around January 1st of 99. So like a week before. And I said, I already got my flight to go in. And he goes, he might just be flying everybody in to say, hey, we're done, so. But he was right, but I was being loyal. And that was like the 12th and 13th, I think, or 13th and 14th of January. And then, or 14th and 15th. And then nothing. And it's like, yeah, we'll come back. And some of the wings, and I knew they were wrestling fans, Detroit Red Wings, found out later. So I don't think he was blowing smoke up my ass. I think he was just, the things that he had in mind just didn't pan out. And so end of January, they called me and they said, hey, we'd like to offer you a 3-year deal. So that's when I wasn't seeing any dates announced. That's when I kind of figured it was over, so.
I mean, it's interesting because WCW, they're trying to introduce them after WWF have bought them. They're trying to do the invasion of WCW to the WWF, and it's not working. It's not going well. So they revive ECW to kind of make the alliance happen. So you're kind of in WWF doing your thing, and then they're suddenly going to put ECW back together again. What do you remember about that time period of them kind of trying to push WCW and maybe not working, and then them sort of going, right, we're going to do this ECW thing?
Well, I think at that time, the invasion, from what I heard, they put WCW and ECW together because they didn't have enough star power with WCW because a lot of their talent were contracted under Turner. And so they just wrote out that, big money contract, which smart. And then Dallas, I think, took a buyout and, so, and ended up taking less money, but came over right away. And so I remember that period. It was fun, exciting, whatever. You're working with a lot of, top name guys and pretty quick. And I remember the Invasion pay-per-view. We're all in a room and Vince is like, I see Austin starting. Who do you want to start with, Austin? And he goes, Rhyno. And I'm like, oh, this is cool. So I got another Austin story real quick. I don't think I've ever really shared it publicly, but I'm like 3 months in. This is before the Invasion angle and all that stuff. And if that, just started on TV, maybe after WrestleMania. And I'm walking down the hallway going to catering, just got there, whatever, dropped my bags. And then Austin's walking by. He goes, Rhyno, you're a good kid. You mean the world to me. And all of a sudden, I'm just like starting floating as I'm walking. I'm like, that is awesome. And then literally 5 minutes later, I hear him saying it to someone else, like a guy that works for the building, don't even work for us, just working there, guarding the door or whatever. He's like, hey, you're a good kid. You mean the world to me. And I'm like, shit. But then, I don't know if he still does it now, but around the boys, he would say something or say a joke, something fun or funny, and he'd run with it for 2 or 3 weeks. And then he'd come up with something different and then run with that. And, you'd hear him saying it to other people and stuff. So I never told him that story, but he got me though. I'm just like, wow, this is so cool. Boy, does a guy really feel accepted when one of the top guys, maybe one of the biggest stars in wrestling, says I'm a good kid and I mean the world to him. So.
And then kind of towards the end of the Invasion Alliance thing, you have your injury. So you're out.
Oh, wait a second. Shark Boy, he'd do the Austin, give me a shot. Yeah. I told him and my brother, God rest his soul, loved Shark Boy and when he'd do that. And anyways, Shark Boy always says that, hey, you're a good kid. You mean the world to me, which totally pops me.